Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for Banned Identities, Forbidden History, and Challenging School Censorship Laws. I am Michael Johnson, Chief Legal Officer at GLBTQ Legal Advocates and Defenders, or GLAD, and I'm thrilled to have you here for this very important conversation. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. First, I would like to thank our co-sponsors and partners, Equality Florida, ACLU New Hampshire, and PFLAG. This webinar is being recorded, and we will share the recording in the coming weeks. Auto captioning is available, so please activate it on your computer if you would like. We will be taking questions for the panelists a little later on, so please place your questions in the Q&A tab, and we will pass them along when we get to that section of the presentation. First, I'd like to introduce our panelists. I will introduce each person and allow them to say a quick hello and give an opening statement related to this issue. And we'll start with Nadine Smith. She is the Executive Director of Equality Florida. And we do want to congratulate Nadine for being the GLAD Spirit of Justice honoree, which we will award tomorrow night. So we just want to thank you and celebrate you for your accomplishments. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Go ahead. If you want to give a opening statement, that's fine.
Sure. Well, again, my name's Nadine Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Equality Florida. We celebrate 25 years. And in that 25 years working in the state of Florida, we've seen a lot of change and a lot of progress. And right now we're going to be talking this evening about the backlash at which Florida has become the center. And I think it is timely because just because it begins in the South, it never stays in the South. And we're going to be talking about how these orchestrated attacks on the LGBTQ community, particularly on trans youth and LGBTQ students and families, is ramping up as part of a cynical political strategy as we head to the 2024 presidential election. And with that, I'll send it back to you, Michael.
All right, thank you. And next, we have Nicole Parker.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Parker, pronoun she, her, and I'm the Director of Transgender Equality for Equality Florida. And I'm so excited for this conversation because there is all this rhetoric that we're seeing that is fueled by, radical politicians wanting to use the LGBTQ community to further their ambitions for public office. But it's important to also note that when we say protecting kids, that's protecting all kids, all youth, regardless of how they identify. And it's not, we get to pick and choose who. Everyone deserves to be protected and everyone deserves to be respected. So I'm very excited to be a part of this conversation. And back to you, Michael.
All right, thank you, Nicole. And next we have Chris Urchel.
Hi, Chris Urchel. I'm an attorney at GLAD, he, him pronouns. I am here with this group tonight in large part because of some litigation that we're involved in against the state of New Hampshire because of a censorship law, a classroom censorship law that went into effect last year in New Hampshire. And it's just important to note that this is happening in New England, because I think a lot of people across the country and even in New England have a mistaken view that we are insulated from this kind of backlash that's happening across the country, and we're not. And of course, the classroom censorship law in New Hampshire is not at all just based on LGBTQ status. It's also aimed at censoring topics related to race, gender, disability, among other topics. And so anyway, I'm really proud that GLAD's part of the litigation trying to get the court to enjoin the enforcement of this harmful legislation. Thanks, Michael.
All right, thank you, Chris. Next, we have Tina Philibot.
Thanks, Michael. I want to start by thanking GLAAD for holding space and all the sponsors who are supporting this discussion. It's super important. So yeah, my name is Tina Philibot. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm coming here from New Hampshire. I'm a DEI director at a public school in the state, and I'm also one of the plaintiffs in the Banned Concepts lawsuit that's being represented by GLAAD, by Chris and ACLU and numerous other folks who are not okay with what's going on in New Hampshire. So the Banned Concepts law in New Hampshire, most of the language is directly pulled from that Trump era law. It is parroting the same sentiment, which is to stop discussions around race, around equity, and around LGBTQ rights, and to scare people, When Chris was talking about enforcement, the New Hampshire law is particularly special because we do have an enforcement clause. So if a teacher or educator were to defy this law, they risk losing their teaching license. And they could also be brought to Superior Court. So really appreciate having this conversation today because, not only is it our teachers though, but more importantly, our students are suffering on account of this because of the chill that this ban has created. And so I'll leave it at that. And I want to thank you.
Thank you very much, Tina. Next, we have Andres Mejia.
Hola, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you all for being here. My name is Andres Mejia. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm also a DIJ director in one of the New Hampshire school districts. And with Chris and Tina on part of the lawsuit against the Department of Education commissioner for enforcing these laws in the schools, which are hurting our students the most, students of color, students from the LGBT community and from other historically marginalized identities. Like it's happening and we see it every day. And we could talk more about that later, but that's why, I'm happy to be here to share what's going on in our state.
Thank you. Thank you, Andres. And we have Alberto Cairo.
Yes, thank you, Michael. So yes, I'm Alberto. I am a professor, a university professor down here in Miami. I am the proud single father of 3 children. One of them is a transgender boy. And he came out a year ago, more or less. And since then, I have been observing all the developments in the state of Florida, in particular, with great worry, and in part taking them as personal attacks on my child and on me, and I don't take that lightly. And as a reaction to that, I have started doing what I do best, I would say, which is to write about these issues. I have written for the Washington Post, for the Bulwark about what is going on. I will probably write more about that. And I'm here just to talk about essentially my personal experience. I have much less experience about these issues than anybody else in the panel, but perhaps I can bring a different perspective to the conversation. I appreciate it. Back to you, Michael. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we want to thank all of you for being here this evening. As anti-LGBTQ attacks targeting students and schools are escalating all over the country. This is such an important conversation to be having today. Nadine, Nicole, Alberto, you've been fighting what may be the most highly profile anti-LGBTQ school law in Florida. Christina and Andres, you're challenging a lesser known but an incredibly harmful law in New Hampshire. So I'd like to get started with really just a big picture question and if y'all could just talk about the role that public schools play and the importance of having supportive policies and honest curricula in schools. And I guess let's start with Tina.
Thanks, Michael. The role of public schools is to create an informed citizenry, of course. It's to promote the public good. It's to provide a free and appropriate education, right? And it's also the one piece of public good, right, that we provide to even the playing fields, right? It's also about equity. And again, going back to free and appropriate, right? So it's a public good that we provide for our students and for our kids. The policies, let me start with the truthful history piece, right? So that part, a big part of education, I believe, is so that helping kids understand the world around them so that we don't make the same mistakes that people made who came before us, that we're able to lean into the beautiful parts of our history and learn from the parts where we need to learn from. If we teach a history that's watered down and whitewashed, we will continue to make the same mistakes. The durability of white supremacy, right? The durability of, you're seeing these laws come through. The fact that they're even able to be brought forward is clearly problematic. And it makes sense that folks are coming at public education, right? Because this is where we're literally building a citizenry. So, I'll leave it at that and I'll pass it on over to Nadine to expand on that.
Sure. Well, there was a report that came out some years ago, and I believe it was the CDC, but they said there are three things that really impact the trajectory for all kids, but have a particular impact on LGBTQ kids in terms of belonging, inclusion, acceptance, and all the things that counter a lot of the narrative that we have around, suicide and depression and dropouts and all of the risk behavior that come from living with the pressure of being stigmatized, ostracized, and very often rejected. And so what we know is how your family treats you, the atmosphere in your school, and if you're part of a faith community, the atmosphere in those three places can have a massive impact on the trajectory of life for good or for ill. And so, the family is the roll of the dice. The faith community, we are seeing a lot more progress within faith communities as they sort of confront unexamined prejudice against the LGBTQ community. But when it comes to schools, you are compelled to go to school. You are required to go to school. And because of that, it is incumbent upon all of us to create an atmosphere in that school where every child is protected and every family is respected. And what we also know is that, those who do not remember history are doomed to repeat it. And I would argue that right now, we are in a cycle of repeating a very familiar pattern of scapegoating, of stigmatizing, of attacking the right to exist, very specifically of trans young people and adults, but more generally of our entire community. And it's happening at a moment where it's not coincidental that the twin attacks on, banning books, censoring content, marginalizing and stigmatizing LGBTQ students is happening as they also wield these words "stop woke" as a proxy for the racist language they want to use in order to do what the Daughters of the Confederacy did before them, and all of the folks in the 60s who were putting up Confederate statues. They want to rewrite history. And I mean that quite literally. In Florida, Governor DeSantis has brought forward a program to teach history teachers and social studies teachers by telling them that they should teach that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were virulently anti-slavery. This is the same school district that also rejected 41% of math books, saying it had too much woke content. And among the things they listed was a math book that noted that Dorothy Vaughan Johnson, one of the figures in Hidden Figures, was the first Black woman to chair or head a department within NASA. They said that's woke garbage that has no place in the classroom. We shouldn't be talking about race. So it's a very dangerous moment. But again, we'll talk more about it. But we've seen these twin attacks that invoke racist imagery and a desire to erase anything that would cause an honest conversation, while simultaneously invoking some old tropes, calling us groomers, calling us pedophiles when it comes to the LGBTQ community.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else like to comment?
I can jump in. Oh, sorry about that, Chris. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add one point, which is that a unanimous Supreme Court decided in 1954 in Brown versus Board of Education that that separate but equal was unequal, right? And we have fallen, nationwide in our public schools, we have fallen far short of the promise of Brown versus Board of Education in so many ways, and we've never achieved full integration of our schools. But I just want to flag that I do think that part of that promise is inclusive, multicultural, broad, dynamic curriculum and inclusive environment. I think that that's really essential to what a truly integrated education means. And so having these fights today is just super important if we're going to have if we're ever going to have the promise of Brown versus Board of Education realized.
My perspective is that what we're dealing with in this country is a very well organized and well-funded authoritarian grassroots movement. That's what we're dealing with. Being someone who has the equivalent of a minor in contemporary history, everything that is happening sounds very familiar to me. Because one of the first steps that any authoritarian movement does is to try to take control of the institutions that take care of controlling the discourse, the public discourse. That includes journalism. That's the reason why this authoritarian movement is obsessed with destroying journalistic organizations. And that is also why they are obsessed with taking over school boards and school districts as much as they can, because they always work from the bottom up. And the reason why they want to control the discourse is to essentially shrink the sphere of acceptability or normalcy. They want to be able to define what is normal and what is abnormal. Anything that is not discussed in schools is not abnormal. All of you have very different experiences than I do. I grew up in Spain in the 80s, and I remember that in the 80s, there were no gay people around, right? But obviously there were gay people around. It's only that they were not out, right? They were not out. And there was some point in which gay people started expressing themselves, becoming visible, participating in public discourse, being part of the schools, and that visibility brings familiarity, and familiarity brings empathy, and empathy is the path to destroy any authoritarian movement.
Thank you, Alberto. Let's go next with just for those that don't know that may be joining our presentation here today. Can we start off by just explaining exactly what happened in Florida and what's happened in New Hampshire? And so I guess let's start. Nadine, if I can let you start with Florida. You're on mute.
What's really happening, thank you, in Florida is a proxy war for the presidency. Donald Trump is now a Florida resident. Governor Ron DeSantis is the governor, and they both want to be president in 2024. And so in order to outflank Donald Trump to the right, Ron DeSantis has pulled together a grab bag of culture war messaging, attacks on reproductive justice and access to abortion, the so-called Stop Woke Acts that go after schools and attempt to erase any ability to have honest conversations about race, even tells private corporations that their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are now under their scrutiny. And of course, most publicly, the Don't Say LGBTQ bill. And again, these are all about creating a platform for him to sort of own the mantle of the extreme right. And, and it's been very successful for him, getting on Fox News, going into these scapegoating rants and raising a lot of grassroots money. And so what we have seen in the last two legislative cycles are legislation that appeals to ignorance and fear of difference. Very specifically, 2 sessions ago, we saw the legislature in an 11th hour maneuver, pass a ban on trans kids playing sports, despite the fact that for 10 years, Florida had guidelines in place that were working absolutely fine. And the people behind this legislation even admit no issue has been raised in the state of Florida that gives rise to the legislation. It's all about politics. And then we saw it again this legislative session where they pursued this so-called don't say LGBTQ legislation that is aimed at creating a hostile atmosphere for anything that affirms the existence of LGBTQ people. It's written intentionally vague. It is written in a manner that is intended to make teachers fearful of standing up on behalf of gay kids or kids with gay parents. My son is 11 years old. He's a sixth grader. And I remember when he was in third grade and there was parent teacher day and we at the new school he was going to and heard a little girl say to him, "So if that's your mom, who's that?" And he said, "That's my mom as well." "You have two moms?" she said. And the woman who would become Logan's teacher said, "Yeah, some people have a mom and a dad. Some people have just a mom or just a dad. And some people have two moms or two dads. There's a lot of ways that people organize their families." That was all she said. It was enough for the kids to move on from the topic. It was without judgment. But what we hear from teachers, many of whom are leaving the profession because of this, is it has created such a fearful atmosphere that school districts are kind of swinging wild. Miami-Dade just failed to renew their support for LGBTQ History Month in October. We've had school districts in one breath forbid LGBT teachers from putting their spouse's picture on their desk and then reversed under pressure. We've seen school districts tell their student yearbook leaders that you can't mention anything about the statewide student walkouts in response to this terrible legislation. In addition to the legislation itself, the governor has also weaponized what ought to be independent government agencies in order to strip away legal protections, the Board of Education, the Board of Medicine, and now quite recently they passed a policy saying a teacher's teaching certificate, their ability to do their job will be stripped away if they are brought up under these new legislative bans that are intended to stigmatize and censor. Nicole, did you want to add anything to that in terms of the Florida landscape?
No, I think you did a great job. I know that further in the conversation, we can talk more about what some districts are doing, but it's just from a perspective of a trans person. I remember being in school and just trying to navigate that, but I can only imagine trans kids now that will turn on the news and see their existence be debated by people who have never even met someone like them, and how that must feel. It's like it's 2022 and we're in a space where we felt like we were making progress and becoming more inclusive. And I do want to say in the space, us adults are having these fights. The young people are inclusive. The young people just look at each other as like, you're my friend and we like the same things, and that's that, you know? And it's important for us adults where we're continuing to fight, but the adults that are creating all of this idea and all this rhetoric is really just, it's so asinine and it's just so horrific, because kids are just being kids. And if we say that all kids need to be protected, that includes LGBTQ plus kids, that includes trans kids. And just because our experience may not be widely understood does not make it bad. It just makes it different. Imagine we were all the same and how boring that would be. The world is beautiful because we're all different, and we should celebrate that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Powerful statement. So now, Chris, if you don't mind telling us a little bit about New Hampshire, what's happening going on in New Hampshire.
Yeah, I'd like to bring us back a couple of years, mainly to 2019 and 2020, because there was a really difficult period of time in our nation's history for sure. But in that period of time in New Hampshire, we were seeing expanded protections for students in schools, particularly for LGBTQ students, but other students as well, because there were non-discrimination protections that didn't exist in schools prior to 2019 that were signed into law that year. And additionally, there was a global pandemic which wreaked havoc across the country for everybody in public schools. But there were safety protocols that were being implemented in schools in New Hampshire, and precautions to protect students' health. There was and teachers' health too, of course. And then in the wake of the murder of George Floyd in the summer of 2020, and the massive movement in support of Black lives, we saw increased focus on structural inequality in our public schools. And this is true in New Hampshire too. And I think that has a lot to do with, I don't want to speak for Tina and Andres, but I believe that the roles that they fill in their schools were basically because public schools in New Hampshire were trying to meet the moment, right? But with all that progress, in 2019 and 2020, backlash was, I suppose, inevitable, unfortunately. And so in the aftermath, in the wake of all this, we've seen legislation to defund public schools in New Hampshire and to shift money to through voucher programs to private schools, independent schools. Limitations on public health measures that can be implemented in our public schools, surveillance and monitoring efforts, both legislative and otherwise, in our schools, and classroom censorship. And in particular, the proponents of this legislation call it the Divisive Concepts Law. We've called it the Banned Concepts Law. However you decide to name it, what it does is it censors teachers, and it prevents really important conversations from happening in the classroom. And in this context, there's also a ton of backlash against LGBTQ students in public schools. And I just want to flag that both Andres and Tina work in school districts that are being sued right now because community members are upset that the school districts have supportive policies for LGBTQ youth. And I want you to just, I mean, everybody knows this already, but everybody who's a part of this panel, but I want to stop for just a moment and, echo what Nicole was saying and just think about what the message is that sends to LGBTQ students when they have protections, and those protections are being challenged and taken away by political forces that are totally outside of their control and over which they have no influence and no ability to make any influence. It just, the hurt that they feel is just something I can't even imagine, Also in September of 2020, also in the wake of the George Floyd murder and the Black Lives Matter movement, the Trump administration issued an executive order that prohibited instruction on certain identified concepts. And the censorship law that was adopted in New Hampshire is, as Tina said earlier, is modeled directly off of that executive order. And just to be clear, that executive order was determined to be unconstitutional by a federal court in California and never really went into effect because of that litigation. And so similarly, we are challenging that litigation on the same premise, that it's unconstitutionally vague, it's vague on purpose. It puts educators in a position where they do not know how to comply with the law. And so therefore their choices are to go overboard and remain silent or risk losing their licenses. And the stakes are just too high for teachers. So I just wanted to, kind of set up a little bit of that context, and we're in the midst of this litigation right now. It's going very well. So pleased to have ACLU of New Hampshire and ACLU National as partners in this litigation. They're really the leaders in moving this litigation forward. They brought the team together. We've been working very hard. The state asked to dismiss this lawsuit, and that motion is currently before a judge. We argued it on September 14th, I believe. And so it's been about 40 days since then. The judge said a decision on the motion to dismiss would come down within 60 to 90 days. So, as soon as 20 days from now, we might be getting a decision on that motion. And assuming that the case stays alive, which it should, and assuming the judge doesn't dismiss it, then we'll be looking for expedited discovery to try to get as much information as we can as quickly as possible, because we need to get this issue resolved for New Hampshire teachers, and we need to do it fast, because right now, today, this school year and last school year, students are being deprived of a complete education because of the existence of this really harmful law.
Thank you, Chris. That so that really leads me into the our next question. And I'd like Nicole and Alberto and Tina and Andres really to discuss, can you talk about the impacts that these laws are having on your students, on parents, teachers, communities? Discuss the impact these laws are having.
Sure, we've talked some about it, but I want to kind of bring up some other chilling effects that we're seeing here in Florida. We are seeing districts craft language about if there is a transgender child in PE, all parents must be notified. Now think about that for a second and think what kind of like firestorm that creates and what kind of like witch hunt that creates between parents and students trying to figure out who the trans kid is in class. That is so problematic. That is so invasion of privacy. It's cringy to think about. We also have districts that are requiring teachers to out a child if they just so happen to find out that the child's LGBTQ. Not if the child came out to them, not if they have concerns about their health or well-being, just if they find out about it, they're being told to out the child. And you also have to remember that some kids are not in safe spaces at home. Some kids cannot come out at home. And especially if the kid does not come out to you, the fact that we are seeing language being crafted that you have to out them is so dangerous. You get to see that kid for X amount of hours, but they have to go home and deal with what they have to go home and deal with. And that's so important to highlight here. And also the fact that in 2021, the rate of suicide attempts among LGBTQ kids in Florida have increased for the first time in a decade. And I want to say if we took LGBTQ plus out and we said, in 2021, the suicide attempts of kids would increase, there would be a widespread outrage. Folks would be like, what do we need to do to change this? But when you add in LGBTQ plus, you start to see folks just turn a blind eye, and that's not okay. We have to fight for everyone, and we have to make sure that everyone is protected. And even when it comes to healthcare, we are seeing the Department of Health put out guidelines against gender affirming care. We are seeing Medicaid remove coverage from trans people here in Florida. And I want folks to sit back and realize, imagine you had a week's notice that your healthcare coverage was just going to be stripped away from you just because of who you were. Not that you didn't pay, not that you didn't qualify, just because of who you are. How would you navigate that? And that is how so many trans Floridians on Medicaid felt on August 21st when their coverage was stripped away from them. And we're just constantly seeing this, and it's just only getting worse. And it's important to call out what it is. It is radical politicians wanting to use the LGBTQ plus community as low-hanging fruit to get their base around them so that they can go and become president one day. And we have to call that out. We have to stand against that. And it's just truly sad what we're seeing here in Florida.
Thank you, Nicole.
I would like to add to what Nicole just said regarding the gender affirming care, because on top of the Medicare rules that they made up a while ago, this same Friday the 28th, the Board of Medicine is going to meet, and they are going to very likely completely ban youth gender affirming care, completely. I wrote a piece about that, obviously attacking the Board of Medicine and attacking our Surgeon General about it, but it's dangerous. Obviously, this is going to be it's going to have an effect on our children, on our youth, and that really worries me. Again, I see these as personal attacks just because of my son, but I also see them as general attacks to people like him. So that will be one of the impacts. Another impact, also connecting to something that came up before, is that measures such as the Don't Say LGBTQ law by DeSantis a while ago, that is having already a chilling effect, and we saw that very clearly in the school board meeting. I also wrote a piece about that a while ago in the school board meeting down here in Miami, in which what happened was that the school board, which in the past majoritarily voted in favor of celebrating LGBTQ month, History Month, this year they flipped completely, and 8 out of 9 voted against celebrating it. And the main reason they did it, and I'm going to be honest with all of you, is that they are scared. They are scared. They are scared that they are going to somehow break the law. Why they are scared about that? I'm not an attorney, but I've spoken to attorneys who know much more than I do about the law. It's because of the vagueness of the law, right? The law refers to, you cannot provide instruction to children who are on K3. And then beyond that, in a way that is not educationally or developmentally appropriate. But the problem is that there are no standards to define what is appropriate. And as I wrote in my piece, they are never going to define those standards. Why? Because it is useful. As Nicole was saying, it's a great weapon for political impact.
Tina, Andres, you want to
Yeah.
impact in New
Yeah.
Hampshire?
I think it's having, you know, a huge impact on our students. So my role in the district is to create spaces of belonging where no matter what your differences are, you feel like you belong and you know that you belong, and that you're included in the material. Your history is spoken of when you come and learn, that you see yourself in what you're learning. And as part of my role, and what we see happening now is people who are even in this work and teaching, making sure they had books and material in their classrooms or on their bookshelves or images on their walls that showed students, you know what, you belong here and your experience and your identities matter. Those are no longer there. You know, teachers not knowing, because this law passed, am I going to lose? Because the law is, if someone writes you up, you go through the process and you can lose your teaching license, your certificate. And that's what teachers are afraid of. Like, it came out so vague and they're like, can I have this book that has two boys talking about how they love each other? Can I have the LGBTQ flag on my wall in my classroom? Can I have, you know, can I say, you know, we're dealing with issues right now because for sports and activities, educators deciding to use based if you identify as a girl, if you identify as a boy, and they felt like that was a big issue. You know, that they didn't just say boy and girl. They're letting people choose what they want to identify with. And they made it a huge deal, like parents making noise in the community. So that's what's happening. The impacts of this law. The impacts of this law is, and I've been working in this district for a little over a year, doing this work. I've been doing this work across the state of New Hampshire, but for the specific district, for the past year. And the stuff that these students are going through and what they're hearing, you know, Black kids being called the N-word and being told they're going to get by a white kid, I want to put my knee on your neck and kill you like George Floyd. You know, students of color, students from the LGBT+ community being told, I can turn you straight, and not going to class on time because they have to pass the group of boys that are saying these nasty things to them. Being sent Snapchat videos of the LGBTQ flag being burned. A bunch of homophobic and transphobic comments being said, and teachers hearing it and not knowing if they can say, hey, you can't say that because of the bill. So while before, where teachers were starting to have more courage and say, actually, that's not allowed in our classroom. You know, we want people to feel like they're included, like the people. Now teachers are just letting it happen because they don't know if they can say, you know what, you can't say that, or what you said was racist, or what you said was homophobic or transphobic. So therefore, they're just letting it happen. And that's because of this law came out so vague and it scared a lot of people. So that's the impact, some of the impacts of this law that I'm seeing in our schools across the state.
Any other comments?
I mean, to add on to what Andres is saying in terms of our kids being on the receiving end of the impact, you know, our kids want to talk about a truthful history. They want to know about the Tulsa Massacre. They want to know about Katherine Johnson. They want to know about, you know, and they're like hearing it and they're saying, how come we didn't learn that in American history? How come all we learned, it was centered around how people were enslaved, right? Not centered around this idea of being empowered. So not just what we're not teaching, but how we're teaching what is still left in the books, right? And our kids are like, why isn't my teacher, who I know cares about me, leaning into this? And so I've been explaining to the kids, like, this is a part of the reason why that's happening. And just the look on their faces, right? When I tell them there's this banned concepts law that adults put into play so that we do exactly this, that this chill on our education, chill on the language, the conversations that we get to have, exactly this is what they were hoping for. And they're heartbroken. They're heartbroken. And it creates this, like, education, we talk a lot about curriculum, right? But really education is about relationships. We're not teaching curriculum. I'm teaching students. I'm teaching human beings. Yeah, I'm teaching them about people, right? And experiences. I'm teaching them about biology or whatever. But at the end of the day, nothing gets through unless I have a relationship with my students. In addition to this piece, as educators who are just starting to lean into this work, right? Like Andres is saying, they're just like, well, I don't know what to do. So books are quietly being removed from bookshelves. So you're not going to see a big flashy book ban. What you're going to see is administrator, and again, happening all over the state, but administrator is going to say, that movie Hidden Figures that you watch on the day before you go on vacation, maybe show something else this year, right? Maybe show some Polar Express. Yeah. That it's a quiet kind of shift away from leaning into where we were starting before. The other thing that you're seeing in New Hampshire too is our Department of Education. They were getting information, they were getting complaints, and they really wanted to streamline the receiving of complaints around this banned concepts law. So they put up a much easier pathway, which is, there's a form on the Department of Education website so that you can make a complaint around this banned concepts law. And maybe their intentions were good. Maybe they were just trying to organize the process to follow a law that they believe in, that our Commissioner of Education believes is acceptable. So that in and of itself is problematic. And then this intent to make it easier for folks to file a complaint. Immediately after they do that, the Moms for Liberty group goes on Twitter and offers a $500 bounty for the person who gets the first teacher across the finish line and gets their teaching license removed. And from that point, teachers are now officially scared. This happened last year when the law went into order. This was in a month of this all going down. So now you saw it play out. A whole year has come through, and teachers are still afraid. I also want to say one last thing in terms of the violence of this law, right? And what it's inciting. Before it became law, it was HB 544. Lots of people went and lots of people gave testimony against it. It did not pass. It did not pass. I want to get real clear about that. It did not pass. My daughter was one of the people at the time. She was a senior in high school, and she gave testimony against the bill. And what she said exactly is what Andres had said, was that, I want to be in a place where I feel seen, where I feel like I belong. And she had been experiencing racism and anti-LGBTQ sentiment at her, to the point where she didn't want to go to school. And so after she gives testimony, immediately after, she starts, a person who was pro banned concepts law finds her on Twitter, puts a photo of her on Twitter, says this is where she goes to high school. These are some of the posts that she's done around being, around some of her progressive posts. And within seconds, death threats from across the country at my senior in high school. Those things were eventually removed and everything, but that is what the law incited. When the law actually, and again, after that, it was taken off the table, right? The way that our folks got this over the finish line is they attached it like on a Friday afternoon at 4:30 p.m. before the whole thing was going to go through, right? They attached it as a trailer bill to our state budget. And then whoop, there it went. They snuck it through. And now when I hear Nadine say, now an enforcement clause shows up in Florida, right? That's again, they're all sharing this pathway, this framework that's been created. And you know what, Alberto, you were saying it's grassroots. I don't believe this is grassroots. I think there's some very powerful people behind this, and they're pretending grassroots. They're trying to parrot this idea like it's just the real working class American doing this. And really, you have ALEC behind it. You have the Heritage, you have people who are supporting this work. So it looks like it's just the Moms for Liberty, some moms who really care about kids. That is not what that is. They are very well funded, extremely well organized. and they're coming, they are coming at teachers who are and it lands in the laps of our students.
Sorry to interrupt, I just raised my
Yep.
hand. When I say
Go ahead.
grassroots, I don't mean that they are truly grassroots. They are grassroots in the same sense that the Tea Party was grassroots. It's the exact same, it operates the exact same way. So it works from the bottom up and also top down. Bottom up, because it is true that these parents exist. And I saw them in the school board in Miami down here. Transphobic, homophobic, people praying on the street to save America from homosexuals. That's an actual line that I had to hear, right? That's grassroots. Those are people who exist and they are here. Yeah. The challenge is that now they are well organized because they can be funded, right? They are funded. There are sources that explain how they are funded. A couple of podcasts that have investigated that, but it's still partly grassroots. I would like to also add something to what you said, Tina, which is that, again, emphasizing, and I'm seeing this more from an analytical perspective. Maybe this is the professor in me speaking, but how insidious neo-authoritarianism is, right? Older authoritarianism was sort of like straightforward. They just imposed a complete ban on everything and they just threw people in jail, whatever. That's not, for example, what's happening in Hungary or what is happening in Florida right now. They use much more insidious mechanisms to achieve the same goals because they want to cloak all these operations. They want to varnish these operations as if they were sort of like something that is appropriate and legitimate, right? And they use vagueness as they are doing with the Don't Say Gay bill or Don't Say LGBTQ bill. They say, well, but we don't say anything about, people who are children who are older than K3, right? It doesn't say anything about that. Oh, you say that is don't say gay, but the word gay doesn't appear anywhere. But they do know that it's implied, right? They use these very insidious mechanisms. And I don't know, honestly, as a parent, because I'm just a single individual, how to challenge them. I know how to analyze them and how to write about them and how to argue against them and persuade people about how terrible they are, but a single individual is not enough. And I would like to add something else, and perhaps this pertains to a following question later, but I don't see the same level of organization on our side. I see, and perhaps this is just my individual perspective, I see one group here, another group here, another group there, another group there, but the right wing, they have always been super well organized. How did they destroy the right to abortion? It was a long-term strategy that implied a multi-branch operation that was, again, top-down, bottom-up, grassroots, well-funded, and they are extremely well-coordinated. How do they do that? How do we replicate that? That's what I would like to see.
And I think you lead to my next question, and I'm going to kind of combine these two questions for time wise. Just what are some of the strategies do y'all think that that you could use to challenge and push back these laws? And what can we do to support the LGBTQ youth and to push back against these attacks?
Sure.
Go ahead, Nicole. No,
Okay.
I insist. You go.
Just real quick, there's a theme here that we keep talking about, and that's parents being scared, teachers being scared, school board members being intimidated. So how could we ever expect our kids to feel safe in schools? And I don't think people talk about that enough. How could we ever expect that? And one thing that you can do that I've done with our Transaction Parent Network is a Know Your Rights event. Parents do have rights. Parents can fight back against this. And I think a lot of parents feel like, oh, well, this passed and I can't do anything. But there are federal protections. There are ways to push back on that. So if you are able to put together some Zoom events or in-person events, whatever works for you all, and really get parents to understand that they do have the right to say what happens with their kids. They do have a right to challenge these things. It can definitely go a long way.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have to do in terms of strategy is really understand the fight that we're in. This isn't whack-a-mole. These aren't randomly generated ideas that are coming up organically. This is an orchestrated effort, and it's not simply targeting the LGBTQ community. We have to understand the larger context. Years ago, a demographer named James Johnson, this was pre-Trump announcing, but when everybody knew he would, at a conference in Florida, he basically said, this is why Trump is going to win. America is experiencing the collision of two demographic realities: the graying of America and the browning of America. The graying of America is overwhelmingly white. Healthcare inequity shows up in a way where white people live longer, but the emerging generations are multiracial, more inclusive, and this terrifies the people holding most of the power. Now, that conversation plays out when you hear replacement theory being talked about, when you hear the conversation around abortion framed around the white birth dearth. Everything that we call progress, the ability to marry, inclusive schools, diversity, equity, and inclusion, for them, they see power slipping away. They see, for them, this is an existential fight for the character and nature of America. And so I think that, I can't remember who invoked it first, but I think the reaction to George Floyd, the corporations that showed up in North Carolina to push back against the bathroom bill, the ones that showed up to push back in Georgia against the stripping away of voting rights, the reason that they target these institutions, as Alberto, was talking about, disassemble the fifth estate, the ability for the media to be a watchdog, dismantle public education. They've been trying to do that for years with voucher schools, even though voucher schools, the report cards from how voucher schools are educating are abysmal. All of these things are tied together in a worldview that drives these. And so just like we had 40 years ago, Anita Bryant, the orange juice spokesmodel, launching a campaign called Save Our Children in the aftermath of Miami-Dade passing a human rights ordinance. It started in Florida. She used all the same groomer tropes about who we are. And that campaign went nationwide because she was backed by a group that at the time wasn't concerned about abortion. They were organizing around the fact that they were integrating schools, private schools. It was the moral majority. That's who bankrolled her. And they took that campaign all across the country. It is not an accident. It is not a coincidence that we see these twin attacks being unfolding. Even if you go back further than Anita Bryant to the Johns Committee in Florida, this was a committee of the Florida legislature that had two purposes: to remove, quote, homosexuals and civil rights advocates from Florida school system. And they went in, they blackmailed people, they destroyed lives, they pushed people to suicide, they did all sorts of things. And it's driven by this same ideology. And so I think this incredible moment of galvanized activism, a moment where the veneer was completely pulled away as people watched the video of George Floyd being murdered. That was a moment of absolute terror. And I think so much of what we are seeing is being organized around that. So that is the bad news, that this is part of a worldview that, in order to prevail, must push us backwards. The good news, however, and I want to gently suggest that we not try to be like them. Part of how they do it, through violence, through intimidation, through hurting people, through destroying people. Those aren't tactics that I think ought to be replicated by us. I look at how we won marriage equality after losing 36 ballot measures in a row. We did it by reaching that place of empathy, by telling our stories, by making the people that they had turned into caricatures for ridicule and for scorn and for contempt and stigma into real people. And I think that our superpower has always been storytelling, and not for nothing, polling is actually showing that more people have more positive views of trans people than ever before. But There's a quote from a professor who says, you know, Americans are waking up to what Germany understood, that 1/3 of the country will stand by while another third tries to annihilate the final third. So it's not enough that the majority is with us, though they are on a whole range of issues and not in small number. It is an intensity battle, and we have to create a level of intensity around this that makes us push back, that has teachers saying, yes, I will risk my livelihood to stand up for kids, and has organizations like ours. We've created a legal fund because we're prepared to help defend those teachers. It takes courage in these moments. It always has. There's never been a way around that. But the way you don't give into terrorism is you don't be terrorized. And I will say this, the young people who are in schools, on the one hand, as adults, it's our duty, our obligation. I feel this as a parent to do everything in our power to protect them. But at the same time, let us not pretend that those students are powerless. They have been extraordinary. They organized a walkout during legislative session. Their activism has not waned one iota. They have another walkout that they've scheduled, and they didn't ask us for permission. They called to tell us, this is what we're doing. This is what we need from you. And, you know, that energy is something that we have to keep feeding. We have to keep, you know, engaging. It is hard when DeSantis has created a national right-wing, well-funded juggernaut. But, you know, if it were easy, somebody else would have done it already. The fact that it's hard doesn't mean that we're not doing what we're supposed to do. It just means that it's damned hard, and we have to do more of it.
Thank you. Go ahead, Chris.
So yeah, I just want to add a little. So first of all, I just want to say we've got a little bit of a paradox going on. On one hand, we are in uncharted territory. Things have never been this bad in our nation's public schools, and things have never been this much targeted at trans youth. On the other hand, we are in a place that we've been many, many times before as a movement, right? These cycles are of progress and backlash are continuous, and we see them all the time, right? And we're used to them. 20 years ago today, not a single same-sex couple in this whole country was legally married. And now that right is guaranteed across the country, you know, at least today. And it wasn't because of just, you know, one type of action. It wasn't just because of grassroots action. And it wasn't just because of litigation, and it wasn't just because of legislative work. It was actually all of these things, all of these efforts working in unison together over many years, and you know, in a very organized fashion and building momentum. And so it might be true today that there is some complacency, maybe a lot of misunderstanding about how seriously dangerous things are, especially for trans youth today. But while that's the case, we have the organizing infrastructure, we have the experience. What we need is our local organizations supported. We need to keep litigating. We need to keep doing our legislative advocacy. We need people to show up at legislative hearings, at their school board meetings, and we need people to show up and vote at every single level and know where your local candidates stand on all of these important issues and put pressure. You know, these are the things that we need a call to action about, right? We need people to be showing up for trans youth, because unfortunately, trans youth are their best, are wonderful advocates for themselves. And it's just so amazing when we reach into that well and they come up and they're just with amazing strength and fortitude and convince legislators to respect their rights when they're under attack. But it's not enough to put it all on them. They are generally very vulnerable, politically powerless, small, marginalized group. So let's work together to put in the resources to stand up and fight against it, which we've done before and we can do again.
Thank you very much, Chris. You know, just in the interest of time, I know it is 7 o'clock. I wanted to let everyone know that there are a lot of resources from the various organizations, GLAAD, Equality Florida, ACLU New Hampshire, and PFLAG that are posted in the chat. I will take, you know, I know it's a little bit, it's at 7 o'clock now. I will take a couple of questions if those that have time. I do have a question from Is there any research on our indigenous people and how they accepted all people? I feel like politics are trying to recreate something or censor something that is so human. One question.
So I'm not, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm not specifically aware of the research on how, I mean, in the research on Indigenous people, I can only speak to my experience with the Indigenous folks, the Abenaki in my area. And it's always, you know, I know like an answer to this, like, how do we do this? It's going to feel real glib, but I think it's love. I think it's care. I think that if, you know, they're fighting with violence, and we need to stay connected and remember that the way that we support our kids is we love them, we care for them, we center them and their needs and their voices. And that's been, our students are watching us right now. They're watching the adults operate. And I can't put more of that hate into the world. I can't do that. It's not, I have to be the model for them. And I'll say that as an advocate. And Andres and I have this conversation often, like, we're tired. And we are doing this work like every day in spaces where we don't feel welcome, never mind our kids, in spaces where our existences and identities are being denied, as well as our kids, you know. And in terms of the stamina to stay in the work, like, you know, if I could say something that folks could do, reach out to your Andres or your Tina or your teachers who are doing this work, or your Nicole's or Nadine's and Chris's, and just send a note. Just say, I see you and I appreciate what you're doing. Our stamina to stay in this work, I think, matters. I think that the teachers who are doing this work on the ground, a small something means something. And then there's the big one, right? Like, I hear a lot about how public education, right, is this, is on the ballot. Yet where are our representatives in this fight, right? Where are those conversations directly with our representatives and our senators? I do know that folks on the other side, when, you know, Chris was speaking to these lawsuits that are coming at us, right? Folks on the other side are coming and doing press conferences outside of the school districts, right? Where are our senators and our representatives, right? I know that you care. I know that you believe in the work that Andres, myself, and Nadine, and Chris, and Nicole, that the stuff that we're doing, the writing that Alberto does, right? I feel like I need a little bit more. I think the states, the people, the citizenry of your state needs to see a little more. Yeah, and so I think I just go back to, like, in terms of how we do the work, I think we love more, we care more, and we stay connected, and we eat more food, drink more drinks, dance more dances.
Stay hydrated.
Yes.
Well, you know, first, in the interest of time, I just want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. This has been such a powerful conversation, a conversation that that needs to continue, that will continue. Organizations like GLAAD are appreciative of all that you're doing, and we hope that we can all work together in the future to eliminate all this hate that we have against our community. And so we would just like to really thank everyone for being here this evening. And we really appreciate your insight, and thank you for joining us, and everyone have a great evening. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.